The night my boss asked me to walk his daughter to her car, I learned something about obligation. Some favors are just favors. Others are detours into a different life. My name is Marcus, and for 6 years I was invisible, the IT guy. That night, Allison Grant slipped into the passenger seat, grabbed my wrist, and whispered, "Take me away." Two words that turned a work duty into a cliff edge. I had 10 seconds to decide if I was just an employee or something more. I was 32 years old, underpaid and professionally forgettable. My name is Marcus Williams, and I manage the digital infrastructure for Grant Real Estate Holdings, a company that made its fortune on prime commercial property and the firm handshake of my boss, Edward Grant. Allison was the princess in the tower, the daughter everyone saw at holiday parties but nobody actually knew. She smiled politely, dressed like a magazine cover, and existed on a different oxygen level entirely. That was the setup: an invisible IT guy, an untouchable heiress, and one company dinner that would shatter both reputations. The question wasn't why she asked me to take her away. The question was what she was running from, and why I was the only person who could hear the fear behind the whisper. This is the story of a 10-second decision that unraveled a family's secrets and turned an ordinary employee into the most dangerous man in the room. The annual company dinner was held at the Sterling Room, a private event space on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a champagne fountain that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Edward Grant sat at the head of the long table like a king surveying conquered territory. He had built Grant Real Estate Holdings from a single strip mall in Brookhaven to a portfolio worth just under $500 million, and every person in that room owed him something, myself included. I was seated near the end of the table, close enough to be present, far enough to remain invisible. That was always my place. 6 years in the company, and I had mastered the art of being useful without being noticed. The servers came and went. Speeches were made. People laughed too loudly at Edward's jokes. But the thing that sat wrong with me that night wasn't the usual corporate theater. It was Allison. She sat 2 chairs to her father's right, dressed in a pale blue blouse that looked like it cost more than my car note, her posture perfect, her smile calibrated. But I knew that smile. I'd seen it at exactly 6 previous holiday parties, and every time it was the same: perfectly pleasant, subtly distant, the kind of expression you practice in a mirror until it no longer requires feeling. She was 28 years old and treated like a porcelain asset. And beside her, leaning in a little too close every time he spoke, was David Carrington. He was 34, the son of Edward's largest investment partner and clearly positioned as the future son-in-law. His cufflinks alone were worth more than my entire wardrobe. He kept touching her elbow, and each time she flinched so slightly that nobody else seemed to notice. But I noticed. The dinner wound down around 10:30. People began gathering coats. I was about to slip out when Edward caught my eye and crooked a finger. "Marcus," he said, his voice the kind of warmth that only existed in rooms full of witnesses. "Walk Allison to her car, would you? She had 2 glasses of wine and I'd rather not risk the drive. A favor." That's how he phrased it. A small, paternal request that made him look caring and careful. I glanced at Allison. She was already gathering her purse, her face unreadable. David stood nearby, looking irritated that he hadn't been asked instead. "Of course," I said. "A simple chore." That's what I told myself as I followed her toward the elevator. The parking garage was 4 levels down, dimly lit and mostly empty at this hour. Our footsteps echoed. She walked slower than I expected, her heels clicking quietly on the concrete, and I remember thinking she didn't seem unsteady at all. Not a hint of intoxication. Just a woman in no hurry to go home. When we reached her car, a silver Mercedes sedan, she didn't walk toward the driver's side. She opened the passenger door, slid inside, and sat there staring through the windshield like the decision had already been made before her body caught up. I stood frozen beside the open door, keys still in her hand. "Miss Grant," I said, confused. That's when she reached out, grabbed my wrist with a grip far stronger than I expected, and pulled me down until our faces were level. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and her voice was barely a breath. "Take me away." I didn't move. I couldn't. She wasn't drunk. She was terrified. Before I could speak, the words spilled out of her in a rush, like a dam breaking. She told me about the man her father wanted her to marry, David Carrington, and the merger that depended on their union. She told me about the trust fund that came with ironclad strings. If she refused the marriage, she'd lose everything by her 30th birthday. She told me about the panic attacks she hid with expensive blouses and perfect posture, the ones that had started in college and never stopped. Then through the shaking, she said my name. Not the IT guy, not Dad's employee, my actual name. Marcus, she whispered, I've watched you for 3 years. You're the only person in that company who doesn't want something from me. Please. 10 seconds, that's all I had. Close the door and return to my invisible life, or get in and become the one person who didn't betray her. The engine started before I fully knew I'd made the choice. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and put the car in reverse. Whatever came next, we were already gone. I drove east toward the interstate, no destination in mind, just distance. The parking garage fell away in the rearview mirror, and somewhere in those first 10 minutes, the shock began to crystallize into a single terrifying question. What exactly had I just done? Allison sat beside me, her hands resting in her lap, knuckles blanched white. She hadn't spoken since the garage. The city lights blurred past, and the Mercedes hummed forward with the kind of expensive silence that makes every heartbeat feel like a countdown. Finally, she pointed toward an exit. There's a park 3 miles down. No cameras at the east lot. I glanced at her, surprised by the specificity, and turned as directed. The park was nearly empty, tucked behind a line of old oaks. I killed the engine, and the sudden quiet felt like a held breath. She was shaking again, but it wasn't from cold. It was the kind of shaking you do when a secret has been held so long that the release becomes its own form of collapse. Then she started talking, and the story that came out rewrote everything I thought I knew about the Grant family. Her father, Edward Grant, hadn't built his empire on charm alone. For the past decade, he had been systematically inflating property appraisals, bribing city inspectors, and laundering money through shell companies in 3 different states. His largest deals were fraudulent, kept afloat by a pyramid of forged documents and terrified accountants who knew better than to ask questions. David Carrington wasn't just a suitor. He was the son of the man who held the paper trail that could expose everything. The marriage wasn't romance. It was an insurance policy, a merger designed to bury the evidence inside a shared family trust that would make both parties too complicit to testify. Allison had discovered the fraud by accident 3 years ago when she found a mislabeled file on her father's personal laptop during a holiday visit. She started digging, slowly, quietly. She became the ghost in her own home, copying documents whenever Edward left the room, building a dossier that now lived on an encrypted USB drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book on her nightstand. The panic attack started during her junior year of college, when she first began to suspect that her father viewed her as a bargaining chip rather than a daughter. By the time David Carrington appeared at a dinner party 18 months ago, the deal had already been struck behind closed doors. She had until her 30th birthday to comply, or her trust fund, $12 million, would evaporate. But the money wasn't what terrified her. It was David. She described him in clinical detail. Obsessive, controlling, someone who referred to her as an acquisition in casual conversation. He had installed tracking software on her phone without her knowledge. He showed up at her apartment unannounced, demanding proof of her location. 3 weeks before the dinner, he had cornered her in a hallway and said, "Your father and I have an understanding. You're part of that understanding. Don't embarrass me." That was the night she stopped sleeping. Then she looked at me. "And you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why me?" Her answer landed like a punch. "Because I've watched you for 2 years. You're the only person in that company with undetected admin access to the entire server. You built the backend yourself. The maintenance logs, the file permissions, the cloud backups, you know every gap." She paused, eyes wet. "I didn't just need an escape. I needed someone who could help me leak the documents to the SEC before my father erases both me and the evidence." The favor was never about walking her to the car. It was a calculated recruitment, and I had walked straight into it. The gravity of the situation settled over me. I wasn't just a driver. I was her chosen co-conspirator in a plan that could topple a $500 million company and send powerful men to prison. And she had waited for the exact moment when my face would be the last one her father saw before she disappeared. That's when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single notification. Find my device. Your location has been shared with Edward Grant. I stared at it. She stared at me. And in the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle slowing down at the edge of the park, headlights sweeping through the trees. I killed the headlights and shoved the gear into reverse, gravel spitting under the tires. The Mercedes slid backward behind a cluster of bushes just as a black SUV crept into the lot, its beams slicing through the mist. Two men stepped out. I recognized neither of them, but Allison did. She went rigid. "That's Lasker," she whispered, barely a breath. "He's former military, handles my father's security when the regular team isn't enough." The implication landed like a punch. Edward already knew she was missing and he hadn't sent the police. He had sent his private enforcer. I turned off the interior lights and dropped my voice. "Does he know this car?" She nodded once. "It's registered to the company. The GPS tracks to a server in the office." I felt the walls closing. If the SUV logged the Mercedes' location, staying put was a countdown. Lasker swept a flashlight beam across the gravel, pausing on a fresh tire track. Then his partner pulled something from his jacket, a tablet. They were running the plate remotely, triangulating the last known coordinates. We had maybe 60 seconds. I made a choice. We ditched the car. Now. Allison didn't argue. We slipped out the passenger side, keeping low, and vanished into the tree line on foot. Behind us, the SUV's engine rumbled back to life. 30 minutes later, we were huddled in a 24-hour laundromat 3 miles away, the smell of bleach and damp fabric doing nothing to clean the dread off my skin. Allison pulled a small USB drive from inside her phone case. "Everything is on here," she said. 6 years of records, the bribes, the false appraisals, the shell companies. But there's something I didn't tell you yet." Her voice cracked. "Last week, someone at the firm filed a report with the audit committee. They flagged unusual server access from my user account. My father's people pinned it on me before I even knew it was missing. As of tonight, I'm officially suspected of data theft and corporate espionage." So it wasn't just about escaping a forced marriage. She was a fugitive from her own family, set up to take the fall the moment the documents went public. The twist hit harder when she showed me the email trail. David Carrington had been CC'd on the internal investigation memo. He wasn't just the groom, he was the architect of the frame. The whole marriage offer was a trap designed to keep her in the family, docile and dependent, while they slowly dismantled any credibility she might have as a whistleblower. If she ever spoke up, they could call her a bitter ex-fiancée, a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge. But if she stayed silent, she'd be complicit. "No exit door," I looked at her. "What do you need from me?" She held up the USB. "The audit flagged my account, but not yours. They didn't check IT admins. Your credentials can still access the backup server offsite. If we can log in from a safe network, I can upload the documents directly to the SEC whistleblower portal, along with proof that David planted the false flag." The risk was astronomical. If we triggered a security alert, Lasker's team would have an IP address within moments. And if we failed, both of us would be facing prison not for the fraud, but for the theft they'd already pinned on Allison. I would become the hacker accomplice, the dark side of the IT guy goes rogue story the lawyers were already writing. But when I thought about the way she'd whispered my name in that garage, the way she'd chosen me out of desperation and calculation, I understood something. She hadn't just picked a tech ally. She had picked the one person who could prove she had no control over her own account, because I alone knew the access logs from before the audit. I had maintenance records that showed David's own assistant had requested password resets on Allison's profile 6 weeks earlier, using a ticket system I happened to archive. In other words, I had evidence that the framing was real, and I hadn't even realized it until now. But there was an even darker layer. While Allison was talking, I ran a quick diagnostic from my phone on the company's remote portal. A silent ping. What I saw made my stomach drop. The server logs from tonight showed that someone from inside the office had remotely wiped the surveillance footage from the parking garage between 11:02 and 11:08, the exact window of our escape, and the wiping commands had my digital signature. Someone in the firm had already begun erasing the evidence of our encounter, and they'd forged my credentials to do it, so I was being set up too. I wasn't just helping a whistleblower, I was being written into the crime. I turned the phone toward Allison, her face drained. "They're faster than I predicted," she said. The game had just shifted from escape to survival. I closed the laundromat door, pulled the hood of my jacket up, and spoke slowly. "Then we don't wait. We upload tonight before they finish framing us both. There's one terminal in the city I know that's off-grid, a public access machine at the old library annex. No cameras, no login requirements, and I can tunnel through a VPN that won't log, but we have to go now. And once we submit, there's no undoing it. We'll both be exposed." She stood, the USB clenched in her fist. "I've been waiting for this longer than you can imagine. If this is the night it ends, then let's end it right." That was the moment I stopped being the invisible IT guy and became the co-author of a financial reckoning. The laundromat clock ticked past midnight. Outside, rain began again. And across the city, Edward Grant was already on the phone with his legal team, preparing to burn the evidence, unless we got to the server first. We reached the old library annex at 12:47 in the morning. The building was a relic from the 1970s, squat and brick, with a single flickering lamp over the entrance. The side door was unlocked, just as I remembered. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. We found the computer lab, 4 ancient terminals lined against the wall, the kind nobody used anymore. No cameras, no activity logs, and the network was still running through a forgotten municipal server I'd used once to test a security patch. This was our window. I booted the terminal with an anonymous Linux drive, fired up the VPN, and logged into the offsite backup. My credentials still worked. The screen glowed with file directories. Allison handed me the USB, her fingers cold. "The folder is labeled Seed," she said. I found it and started the upload to the SEC whistleblower portal. The progress bar crept forward, 5%, 10%. But then the terminal pinged with an alert. Another remote session had been opened on the same backup server. The user ID was Admin Grant. I recognized it immediately, Edward. He was inside the server, systematically deleting folders one by one, heading straight for the historical logs that contained the forged appraisal records. He wasn't just burning evidence, he was racing us. I redirected the upload to prioritize the summary file, the one Allison had written that connected every piece. As the percentage climbed, I watched Edward's path on the server. He had no idea we were mirroring, 40%, then 50%. Lasker must have realized the car was abandoned by now. Any moment they could trace the network activity to this building. I looked at Allison. She was watching the screen with a stillness that felt almost holy. Suddenly, the terminal flickered. Edward had triggered a server-wide shutdown command. The screen went black. I thought he'd cut us off, but the VPN had already buffered the file transfer to a relay node in another state. When the monitor blinked back on, the status read, "Upload complete. Confirmation number 84721. The evidence was in SEC possession. The shutdown had been too late. Now the only thing left was to not get caught before the feds acted. I yanked the USB, logged off, and shut down the terminal. We slipped out the back exit just as a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Lasker and his team spilled out, flashlights cutting through the rain. But we were already gone, disappearing into the night a second time. The next 48 hours felt like a fever dream. The SEC launched an emergency freeze on all Grant real estate accounts. Federal agents raided the corporate headquarters at dawn on Monday. Edward Grant was arrested in his office, mid-shred, with a stack of falsified documents still warm from the copier. David Carrington tried to flee via private jet out of the municipal airport, but federal marshals intercepted him on the tarmac. His father's company was implicated as a co-conspirator in the bribery scheme, and within weeks, both men were facing charges of conspiracy, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice. The internal audit report that had framed Allison was exposed as a fabrication, authored by David's assistant under a burner account. My archived maintenance logs proved the forgery. Allison was not charged. Instead, she was granted whistleblower protections and a partial immunity deal for providing the full dossier. She lost the trust fund, but she never wanted it. What she gained was something she'd never had before, a life without a clock ticking toward a forced wedding. She moved out of her father's estate and into a small apartment in the city, the first place she'd ever chosen